So it's the 6th of July, 2022, and we just had a long visit for just over a month with Lumpur Sumedho here. It was quite a special time for us. And right now, although I saw a glimpse of Lumpur, he just went back to his kuti, but he's been away, and Ajahn Cunda was away, so there's just a few monks here, novices and anagarkas. So we had a nice talk at tea time. And it brought up for me a bit of that, of sort of nostalgia around how I got into practice, and just that sense of that addiction to thinking that I think is a quality of any of our lives. I remember talking to a friend many years ago who told me that she didn't think a lot. And I thought, oh wow, that must be such a relief. And it's not always a quality that everyone has. That thinking kind of can overwhelm us, or can be so much part of our lives that it causes dukkha. But there's usually some sort of dukkha present. There's some sort of sense of, whether it's an emotional quality that we have, or in our thinking process, as I mentioned. It can be the circumstances we're in, the repetitive processes we engage in that aren't so skillful. There's some sort of sense of things they're not so right, or we'd rather have them another way. And so that was certainly a quality that I found in myself, that the values I was placing in my life before I really began to engage in Buddhist practice weren't yielding the happiness I was seeking. There wasn't a lot of satisfaction. Always seemed to be something that was missing or wrong. Sometimes people describe that as like a hole that needs to be filled, or this feeling inadequate. Something's missing. Something's not quite right. And this can even be when we actually find that the things that the world tells us is where we're going to find our happiness. We actually either do those things, or we do find some happiness, but it doesn't usually work out in the long term. So we can think about what are some of the ways that the world, we're kind of taught by our culture, our world, society, of what will bring us happiness, what will yield us happiness, or those things. And the Buddha describes them as worldly winds. When we think of what is it to be successful. So for a lot of people, they're taught, well, if you have a lot of money, then you'll be happy, be successful. And if you don't, then you will be unhappy. Which is a bit strange, because in a lot of countries where people don't have great sources of income, they tend to show that their level of happiness can be much higher than those people who have higher levels of income. And so even with those worldly ways of being, it still doesn't add up. And it can tend to be that some of the people who have the most influence and power and money are suffering just as much as those who in very different ways, who are impoverished. So it doesn't seem to be a level of income that means that we're going to be happy. Or if we set ourselves up as thinking that when we have a lot of success in our life, then when we don't, then we're failures, and so we think that that's very bad. So we juxtapose these. We're either not happy when we've got what we wanted in terms of success, or we're unhappy whether we have failure. Often, I remember a family member of mine had said one time that he had inherited a pretty large sum of money, and then he told me if he just doubled that in his life, he thinks that would be enough, that would be happy. And I thought, wow, that's doubling that is going to be a lot of money. And I just wondered, why is it that receiving a large sum of money, one is not happy with that? It's not enough. One has to have more. And so, whatever it is that, the way that we're engaging in, some of these other worldly winds are gain and honor and blame and praise. And we can say it's like pleasure and pain. These are all kind of opposites that we feel quite polarized around. If I only have fame or a good reputation, and there's no one who is despising me at all or thinks of me negatively, then I'll be happy. But then maybe we might have a good reputation, but it's just not good enough. We want it to be better. Or some certain person will always dislike us for some reason or another. Because we can't control other people. We can't make them like us. So there's always going to be a sense of suffering if we are valuing these worldly ways as a sense of where we will find our happiness. Because we'll always be, to a certain degree, fluctuating between the negative or the positive. So for many of us, we're searching for some way. And a lot of the times, the questions that come up in tea tend to be people's very personal suffering, their personal mental anguish, and how to deal with it. And what I keep coming back to is, well, if you find a refuge in awareness, and often the case, a refuge in just being aware of your own sense of your experience of your body, then that's often enough. It's often enough to relieve that sense of continual anguish, so that you start to see slowly a way out. That's because being aware of the body is being aware of something that is present here and now. You can be aware, as I'm speaking right now, of your own sense of breathing. Feel the heat or coolness of your body. Or just the movement. You might be aware that you're sitting, aware of your own posture. And just there, the mind begins to rest. And so often we're not at rest. We're consistently moving. We're moving with our thoughts, our sense of our emotions, worries, fears. We become overcome sometimes with something like anger, or we can't control our own greed. And so we keep coming back to this present moment experience that we can fairly easily find, but even though it's easy to find it, it's not easy to sustain it. And that becomes the sort of conundrum, the difficulty that we have with staying with something that is so simple, yet so hard to do. And the interesting part of it is that for many of us, we can see clearly the peace that arises in our experience. We can see what that is, how that helps us, and when we do pay attention to this present moment experience of our body, just the simplicity of breathing in and out. Our experience can slow down. We begin to see things much more clearly. And so we're not so apt to be moved by our thoughts or our emotions. And it's quite a wonder why this is this very simple, direct experience is so difficult for us to be with. The other night I went back to my kuti, and I've mentioned this before, that we're doing a lot of fire clearance in the monastery, and so when I went back, I went out on my deck and I looked at this tree that is often right in front of my deck, and it was kind of still there, but it had just become a trunk with a branch sticking off of it. And immediately there was this feeling of injustice and wrong and anger that arose. And that's not the first time that's happened. So I was trying to talk myself out of this. Well, probably won't feel about this the same way in the morning. And I could watch this process, but also I could see that it was quite affecting me. So it was very difficult to put it down. And I could see the very unpleasant aspect of it within the body, paying attention to that. And yet the mind would arise with thoughts of, just kind of heat and constriction, and these are the signs of anger. And I could see how difficult it was to put down. And I saw this pattern that, I had been holding this when I come back to the kuti and I see that work's been done, and of course I focus on this negative aspect. Something's missing, something's not right. I wanted this tree saved and that tree gone, and on the story begins to go. It takes on a world of its own. All the trees are going to be gone soon. It's just going to be a desert around each kuti, and why doesn't somebody do anything about this? And yet it was just in seeing that one aspect of what was wrong in the situation. And it's very good to try to recall that, how quickly our minds can get spun by just one thing that we see wrong, and then off our minds go. We grasp around an object, in this case of aversion. And for many of us, we're so familiar with it that there's something that feels right about it, something that feels slightly pleasant, that knowing quality of I'm right. And I think what's often pleasant is it solidifies a sense of me, my story, my being correct, and off I go into that world. What's the right thing to do here? Surely there's someone to blame. So we can watch that, and we can pay attention to it, even though in the midst of it, it seems like it's a tornado. It's something that we can say to ourselves, I've been practicing so long, but how can I not get centered? How can I keep experiencing this aversion? So we get upset about our being upset. This is the second, the third, fourth arrow. I've been practicing this long. Haven't I gotten anything out of this practice? And so we're still, the main thing is we're still pointing at our understanding. And so as I was talking about at tea, I find this teaching that Ajahn Cunda spoke about so helpful, where he said that 80% of the time when you know something, the right thing is for you to pay attention to what to do in a situation. 80% of the time that you know that, you still can't kind of bring yourself to do it. So there's just sometimes a little bit of potential for that to come up, or we have more of a forgiveness quality towards ourselves. Like, okay, well, I'm still aiming towards renouncing this anger, giving it up. And the mind keeps going into its story, whining and whinging, complaining. But even while that's happening, we're still have a center in this tornado. We have a sort of a place where we can find refuge in this. So even while we're experiencing a difficult emotion like this, or a thought process, we still have the capacity to watch it or come back to that watching. And the mind will keep going out, and then we bring it back. And we keep making that effort. And what comes out of that is then we see, oh, right, okay, this is a stuckness. There's a stuck feeling around this anger. And what I find always is interesting is when the story starts to become less important, and the interest in the experience of anger starts to increase, then that refuge, it becomes very much that sense of, oh right, this is the place of safety I can go to. I don't need to keep feeding this story. And so we have to be aware of another thing that someone brought up at tea time, which is how we feel, as I mentioned, averse to our aversion. We want it to go away and get rid of it. So we have an annihilation tendency, a sense of wanting to just cut it away, like taking a sword and just cutting it out of ourselves. But that's not the way either. We can't get rid of it. And in a certain way, that would be quite unhelpful to us, because we wouldn't learn if we could just kind of throw things out like that without the knowledge of how it arises and how it ceases. It wouldn't be so helpful. So our very paying attention is the antidote. And for many of us with our practice, this can come with that sense of, well, if I pay attention enough, then it'll go away. It'll get better. That's true, but again, our motivation needs to come back to learning, to understanding. And when we start to engage much more with an interest around understanding our experience, then we start to lose a concept that we can develop that Buddhist practice is really about therapy. It's really about making ourselves feel better or getting rid of afflictive emotions, rather than really understanding why we have these difficult experiences, this dukkha. So it's a slight conundrum. We know that at the end of the path, there isn't. The Buddha teaches us that by ending our own unwholesome desire, then we won't experience dukkha anymore. We won't experience any kind of suffering. But sometimes we try to short-circuit that by just getting rid of that desire, or we hate ourselves for having it. We think that we're wrong or we're bad practitioners. So again, we just want to keep coming back to that quality of interest and learning. And this can be a problem sometimes for people, like one question that came up in Tuesday's teaching, question and answer teaching with the Berkeley, called Berkeley First Tuesday, was what do you do with boredom? How do you deal with boredom? When one's bored, how do you generate interest? And so we do need to, in our practice, try to understand what effort is. And this can be hard because boredom would be something that stagnates interest. So we need to try to motivate ourselves. Why are we practicing anyway? What are the fruits of the practice? What have we gained from it? What do we understand has helped us? And when we see that, we can gain motivation. When we see that following precepts in our lives that helps us feel like we're doing good things in our life. We're not harming others. We're not harming ourselves. And so there's a lot of good results that we can see with our own practice, and that can be a very motivating factor when we do have a sense of disinterest. I think boredom and losing interest in our own practice is very common, and it's sort of one of the biggest enemies of understanding the Dhamma. It can certainly be one of the reasons why monastics will disrobe, or people who are practitioners just leave the practice. And often it comes from that sense of discontent. This isn't good enough. This isn't what I wanted, or it's not yielding the results I wanted. And, or you don't have inspiration anymore. You're not inspired. There's not these incredible highs that you might have experienced when you started. And that can be not only just a source of leaving, kind of getting away from something that you used to be interested in, but it's also it's kind of where the path is diverging towards, and we want to try to see that in our own practice. If we're starting to get bored and disinterested, no longer spending much time with our with formal practice, not sitting in meditation or sort of enjoying learning about the Dhamma, enjoying our sense of mindfulness, staying with our own experience rather than going out into the world, as I was talking about earlier, out into our thought processes. This is something that we want to pay attention to very closely when we begin to lose that interest that we originally had. In the Zen teaching, it's called beginner's mind, when there's a lot of freshness and interest, and that interest just seems to be pushing us along. It can be something that's very motivating. But in the long run, if we're using that as our inspiration, we're going to dry up pretty quickly. So we need to look pretty carefully when our path starts to move towards that sense of disinterest or in the practice, or our sense of being bored. And the problem with boredom is that it's a habit. It's a habit that we can easily get into. And so we start to look for other means that we can be less bored. And the quick fix is often sensuality. This sensual world is much easier to find an interest in, to find footing in if we want a quick fix, quick pleasures. So we can even forget our motivation for why we were interested in the practice, having a sense fairly early on that this an indulgence in the sensual world isn't quite yielding satisfaction. But since it's what we know and it's a lot easier, we can tend towards that sensual world much easier. And there's so many ways to get distracted these days. So in certain ways we need to learn to be a good friend to ourselves and talk ourselves into those intuitions we had early on that brought us to the practice in the first place. Now, as I've said many times before, that's a lot of the practice is talking ourselves into wholesome and skillful aspects of what we do in our lives, the things that we recognize that are good for us, but they're hard for us to maybe do. And that does take some effort. When you know that there's something good for you to do, but you don't want to do it, it takes some effort to convince yourself. But it usually doesn't come out of just, the Nike ad, just do it. As I said, you need to learn to be a friend to yourself. You need to learn to talk to yourself in a way that will move you in the right direction. And if you think that that sounds a bit strange, just think of all the things that you say to yourself that are a lot stranger. All the weird thoughts and concepts and, well, really all the garbage that we create every day. So when we learn to befriend this voice, this encouraging agent within us, then we do see a lot of strength that comes out of that, and there can be a sense of trust. And this is essentially a way that we guard our minds. This is what the Buddha is teaching when he teaches about right effort. It's an effort you make, but it's an effort that comes with its own rewards, and it comes with trust, because you start to see that in guarding your mind from those negative qualities that arise and encouraging yourselves towards the wholesome, then we begin to gain trust in that. There can be a momentum. We can't always force ourselves to have interest, but we can encourage ourselves in this effort that has good results. And as a lot of people sometimes don't think of this, sometimes they think, oh, happiness is an indulgence, but that is another thing that will give us motivation. We do need to find a sense of pleasure with what we're doing. If it was everything we did in our practice was unpleasant, I mean, how could you just keep going? It really wouldn't work. So that comes from an aspect of noticing and reminding yourself where that pleasure arises. So as I mentioned, if like when I was in my kuti and I recognized this train of thought, of aversion, and I wasn't able to, I just kept running and running with it, but I wasn't able to see like, oh, there's actually something good that arises when I watch my own experience and I learn about aversion, I learn about where it's arising, how I'm feeding it, how I'm giving it nourishment, and how to take that nourishment away, to starve it. So it's a skill, and I learn, oh, that's right, this is a skill I've been gaining and understanding. And out of that, there's also a sense of pleasure that arises. It's as with anything. I mean, the more that we learn, the more skillful we get, the more confident we get. And that provides us with an enormous amount of pleasure. So it's also good to remind ourselves of that. What are the good things that I've received out of following these precepts? Or just the fact that I follow them, that's an incredibly good thing to do in the world. How many people just see a fly and just whack, there it's done. Fly's life is over. And there's no sense that that's a conscious being that also wants to live. So we see when we refrain from something like that, that's actually something to rejoice in. Or you have a choice of taking some food in front of somebody else and you take 2 of something rather than leaving that person some of what's there. But you make a different choice. You do actually leave them something. So you think about generosity and what that's like, how beneficial that can be. So we're trying to kind of remove ourselves from our tendency towards negativity or unwholesome movements of mind. And there is an uprooting process that we need to engage in with that. We've got to kind of pull ourselves out of the muck. Like that, the metaphor of the lotus. It rises out of the very dirty pond, for example. It's a beautiful flower. So we're learning to open up that beauty for ourselves. And that takes a lot of care and carefulness, and it takes a lot of being aware of our own tendencies of mind. Sometimes we can be quite harsh with ourselves, and this can cause problems in our practice because we can kind of condemn ourselves from not being good enough. And then we just lose motivation altogether because we've made this practice quite painful. So in the end, really everything that we're doing is just trying to learn how to be a good friend to ourselves. And if you can make that your aim, then I think the fruit of the Dhamma will arise within. Because what a good friend is a being that encourages us towards the wholesome and discourages us from the unwholesome. It's not somebody who does the opposite. Someone who does that is more of sometimes an enemy in the disguise of a friend. So we have to be careful of ourselves within that own regard, because our habits can be very strong, our old habits. The way that we treat ourselves, the way that we talk to ourselves, it just isn't always so helpful to us. So we need to learn that and be aware of it and to understand it. So this can take a lot of reconditioning, relearning. And one of the conundrums is that delusion, confusion is sort of our constant partner. So it's hard to see clearly what's actually going on. So that's why, as I was talking about earlier, our refuge can be in our own experience. That's something that we can know. We can know that anger has arisen and anger has ceased. And in that knowing there is peace. So we begin to trust in that process of understanding and mistrust our ways that are more geared towards the world, the sensual world, or the world of becoming or annihilating. So those are some thoughts for tonight, and if anything I've said has been useful, please take that with you, and anything else, just feel free to leave it behind.